Okay guys, and hi, welcome to the first video on creating my hot rod. What we're going to do here is the blockout, and as you can see, I'm going to start making this car by creating a very rough blockout. And the first thing I'm creating here is the wheels. Why the wheels? Well, a hot rod isn't really a car that is made out of one solid piece like most cars, a solid body. There's the wheels, there's the body, there's the engine, there's lots of separate parts. So I'm just starting with the wheels to get a feel for how big they will be, how far spread out they will be. And you can see me creating them here. There's actually a lot of detail I'm already creating in them because I just have this idea. I can use these right away as the base for the high poly and for the low poly even. You can see I used 20 sides for this mesh here, which should be okay. What I'm doing here is adding some edges to make sure that the wheels aren't too straight. I mean, those things are made out of rubber, they're inflated, and especially these back ones are really big balloon tires, so I have to make sure they don't look too straight and fake. I'm not really looking at reference here because the type of wheel I'm making here is something I have in my head from looking at the ref pics of the wheels on cars in my reference folder. So I'm just going ahead creating stuff. I'll probably change it a bit later, and I'll compare it with reference when I go over it. Immediately assigning smoothing groups because that's just a smart thing to do and it's not that much effort. Change the color to something more representable. What I'm doing here is I'm showing you this as well because I really want my thought process to be clear here as well. I'm looking for reference on how exactly a hot rod is built up. What you saw on the previous pages, the previous views, was a page of a guy, an American. I don't know who he is. I just found his page through Google when I was looking for the frame of a hot rod, who built a T-bucket. A T-bucket is a hot rod based on a Ford T early model body and frame, and he's just completely documenting how he built everything. He just started with a few iron beams and built the car from scratch. So here I'm building the little part at the back of the frame, which is actually higher because the rear axle is underneath that part. All these things are just being built going by reference. The page I'm looking at, really fantastic reference, completely documenting the build process of a T-bucket hot rod. So that's my rough frame blockout. The frame at the front is a little bit round, so I'm adding that right away. Just doing a connect in front there. And I'm adding a round beam at the front because, well, it just looks more interesting compared to the square one at the back. Immediately cleaning things up a bit, deleting the insides because I'm going to use a symmetry on it. You can see me looking for it here. Yep, add the symmetry. And that's my basic frame. These are the really important parts because the car, how it stands, how the wheels are spaced apart, what the wheelbase is, the width, it's all determined by these first parts I'm building. What I'm doing here is adding a mesh to build the rear axle out. Hot rods have a solid rear axle, which is the type you see on trucks. It's a little bit more primitive, but these cars aren't very technologically advanced. So I'm just building a quick model. You can see it here on my reference. That's the sort of axle I'm building. On his website, the guy says he's using a Camaro rear end for his car, so I'm sort of basing myself on that. I might change it later. Spacing the wheels apart a bit more, still looking for proportions here. Deleting the insides. Then I changed my my transform center to be able to quickly rotate that around. And you can see the parts are sticking into each other right now. It's something I'm going to fix in a moment. Now here I'm looking at the front axle, and I need a little bit more reference on that because that's a bit of a special system. See, I'm opening this one, and we can see there's also a solid axle at the front. It's got a leaf suspension, and there's also some shocks connected to it. So what I'm doing now is drawing a spline that will be the base for my solid front axle. So why is this thing curved down? Well, the reason for that is because then the hot rod can sit a lot lower to the ground at the front than it would at the rear. Drawing some extra splines there, connecting them with a weld. Just moving that around a bit. Looking at my reference, I need to change things around a little bit more. Just some tweaking to get things to feel right. Now I have to move it to the front, the correct position. You can see my frame isn't aligned correctly. I'm going to have to rotate it, but because changing the orientation of objects is something you should watch out when doing it, so you don't reset X-forms on it or you don't lose the actual orientation by attaching. I'm being careful with it. I'm not doing it too quickly. Here, the symmetry, it's interesting to do it. You can immediately notice that the spacing of the outer parts was a bit too far apart, so I changed that. Yeah, there's my front axle. It's looking good. Going through a few more models, and I decided to build these really slim spoked front wheels. Why am I choosing to build those? Because I want there to be a huge contrast between my rear and my front tires. I want my rear tires to be really big, fat tires that really stand out, and I want my front tires to really contrast that and to be really slim and small with spokes. So I'm starting out from the tube here. Why? Well, because it's sort of like a bicycle wheel almost. Adding some more loops to get that feel in there. Yeah, it's actually sometimes it's easier to use the scale tie pin and use the spinners to change it. There we go. Add some more connects, something like that. Now I'm gonna need to scale the center part. Just scale it like that, and there I have my tire. So when creating wheels, it's not really hard. You just have to do some connects, some scales. Creating the rim now. Looking at my reference there, and there's actually a smaller indented part. I'm going to build that because it adds a lot of detail and makes the wheel more interesting. Scale things to get the proportions to feel right. And now I need a hub in the center of my wheel, using a separate cylinder for that. Why? Because I can give it a different amount of segments. I don't need as many segments on the inside as I do on the outside. I'm attaching them together. Now I'm detaching the actual rim mesh from the tire mesh, just as an element, because it's way easier to select and easier to assign smoothing groups to those parts. As you can see, I'm doing the smoothing groups right away. I really don't want to postpone that sort of stuff. And looking at my reference again, probably going to go for the spokes now. Yeah, I'm creating a spoke by using auto grid, so I can draw on the center part. It appears perpendicular to the mesh I created. Rotating them, doing a 90-degree rotation difference between those. It's just a quick version of the spokes. I don't really want to put too much effort in there. Yeah, I'm changing my pivot point so I can rotate around the actual center of the rim instead of the center of the spokes. So copying that one. It's a bit tricky because I have to get the number of rotations right, but there you see I've got 11 of those, which is looking okay. You can see they're not set correctly. I'm going to change that. Yeah, I can't. I want the top parts to go towards the center of the rim, but I can't do that with just rotations. So just messing around a bit here, deciding it's not working. So instead, I'm just going to grab all these parts and I'm going to duplicate. Yeah, I'm going to. That's what I did is I selected all the outside vertices and I moved them inside towards the center of the rim. And now I'm going to add a symmetry modifier to it and change the mirror part so I can have another set of spokes. Now these spokes aren't correct yet. You can see it looks like there aren't enough of them. I'm going to change that later, don't worry. So back to the front axle. You can see it's not on the correct height yet. I have to change that. I attached the spokes to the wheel so it's easier to move them. Just aligning things out a bit so it looks correctly. Back to my reference. Very helpful page, this one. Yeah, now I'm looking at the frame orientation, and I'm going to mess with that a little bit. I'll move these down a little bit. These are just all really small tweaks to get the design, the proportions, and the feel down correctly. You saw my drawing in the previous video, but I prefer to look for my design and my proportions a lot in 3D as well, because it just works easier. It's easier to move things around, just shuffle a bit with your proportions. Now what I'm doing here is I'm starting the actual body, the part where the driver will sit into. Starting from a box. This is something I don't usually do for cars, start from a box, because most of the time a car body is not a box. You really want your wireframe to be more than a simple box grid structure, but in this case it's really a simple shape, and I can start from a box. I'm still making sure that my edges flow around in the correct way. You'll see so in a moment. I'm adding an edge here to add some more curve to the body. Another one where the windshield will be, moving these in. This is an old car, so there's quite some curvature to the body. There we go, just tweaking that a little bit. Moving this one in a little bit. All this is, you know, if you're not as experienced with building cars, you would look at reference a lot more when doing this. I've looked at the pictures a few times, and I really, because I've made so many cars before, I really have the essence and how the body of this hot rod should flow in my head. But if you're not familiar with this, really go back to your reference all the time. I'm not using that much reference, not as much as you probably would when you're a beginner, but I'm still stressing out the importance for you. Now quickly creating the inside here, because a hot rod is open, so we're going to be building an interior for our car as well. And a few more tweaks. I need to add some more edges here. There we go. Especially at the front, it needs to be a bit more interesting. It's round. Yeah. If I add edges to this mesh, edges and verts, I really want them to add to the shape. I don't want there to be any edges, especially in my blockout. I really don't want to go adding useless geometry. I'm keeping it simple, yet using the simple geometry that I have to add shape. And as you can see here, I'm noticing that I've made it too short. Adding symmetry immediately shows me that there's some proportion issues. So with symmetry on show end result, you can do that by clicking the small icon at the bottom of your modifier stack. I can just modify it. So there we go. I've got most of my basic components already fleshed out. Wheels have to sit outside a little bit more. Changing this front axle again. Especially with this hot rod, where the wheels are key components that really determine the look and the stance of the car, it's important to just keep tweaking and make sure that I'm absolutely satisfied with how they sit. And now I just attached the red body to the frame. Why? If I'm going to rotate the frame, I want my body to move along. So what I'm doing now is adding an oil tank primitive as a gas tank for my hot rod. I got this from a ref pick also, you'll probably come across it. These are these spent alloy gas tanks at the back of a hot rod. I really like the look of them. It's just an interesting shape, so I want to add that as well to my design. Just looking a bit for proportions. It's nice how the round tank contrasts with the more squarishly shaped body. Yeah, it has to be moved up a bit, and I have to move this down. I have to turn off angle snapping, and there we go. That's the sort of stance I'm going for. Car leans forward. I turn it off again. Why? Because I still have to add the engine to it, and I'm going to create the engine in a normal upright stance, and then attach it to the frame, and then afterwards rotate it again. So here's a ref pic of my engine. At the beginning, I'm still convinced that I'm going to add 2 superchargers to my car because it looks totally badass and it fits the entire over-the-top hot rod thing. So just going through my reference a bit, looking at them, trying to get a feel for what the basic shape for this sort of engine is. Of course, I'm going to add a V8 engine to it. What else? Looking at this this page also, because the guy has a few clear photos of his engine. Like this one shows how and where the engine sits. It's good for me to go by. Still, to me, the engine on his pictures looked very small. I mean, I want my engine to be a lot more massive, a lot bigger and fatter, just to go for the exaggerated feel. If I would go realistic, the engine would probably be, I don't know, 10-15% smaller, but I'm not doing that. So just starting with a box here, creating the basic shapes. I'm chamfering these edges because the cylinder heads will be extruded from these parts. Moving these up a bit just to get the feel for the engine right. And now I'm selecting those 2 polygons and extruding the cylinder heads out of it. So I have my basic engine shape in place. Just looking around really to get a feel of how, where the engine sits, how big it should be. Now I think it should be bigger, should be a little bit wider, should sit higher. It's really a process of tweaking. I want things to look as good as possible, so I have to look at it from every angle and really tweak things to get a feel for it. What I'm doing here is adding some more parts to build the superchargers on top. And I decided I want to symmetrize the engine, so I deleted half of it, making the cylinder head a bit higher, rotating it a bit, and I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to attach the supercharger bits to the engine. The tough part is, if it was a single supercharger, I'd be able to connect it perfectly to the engine. But 2 superchargers, I'm having a bit of trouble imagining how that's exactly going to work in terms of the mechanical attachments and how it sits connected to the actual engine. So I just added some chamfers to this box to create the rounded top of the supercharger, and here I'm adding an extra mesh that is going to become the blower scoop on top. I'm not going to make it out of a box. I'm thinking a capsule is better because you have this cylinder connected to sphere at the end. So I'm simply creating a capsule here, changing the number of segments a bit, and I'm going to convert it to an editable poly afterwards, as I'm about to do here. Just changing the segments a bit. You want to make sure when working with cylinders or spheres that you have the number of segments correctly at the beginning, because it's hard to change that afterwards. So I deleted the front, extended the entire thing, and now I have to do a chamfer in the center to be able to create the typical blower shape out of this thing. So just a little chamfer, and now I'm going to manually select these vertices, and it's easier to do this from a front view and move them apart. There we go. That's the sort of shape we're going for. I need to cap the front. There we go. I'm going to inset a little bit and then extrude it to get the blower shape out of it. Changing the position a bit just to align it correctly with the other supercharger part. Change the color to gray because it's stupid looking at a blue and purple engine. And a little box to connect the supercharger with the bottom blower tunnel. I'll tell you more about those parts later, what they do exactly, because it's also interesting to know this. The pink part I just created, those are actually the carburetors, which is pretty much the most detailed part of the entire engine. When doing a blockout, it's not necessary to add those details yet. I mean, that's for later. We just want to get a feel for the proportions and the shapes. So this will do fine for now. I attached all those parts together so I can keep them separate, but if I rotate one of them, all of the others will move along. Now I'm adding a symmetry to the bottom part of the engine, and I think I'm pretty happy with the proportions at the moment. And I have my two superchargers as separate parts, and I decided that it needs to be bigger, a little bit wider, just to get a bit of a bulkier feel. I'm using a lot of scaling here, which you can really only do in the blockout phase. You don't want to do this with your final models because it messes up your X-form. You can get problems with baking, with attaching, with everything. So really watch out for that. Only do it when you're working with sloppy blockout models. So going back to my reference, I'm going to add a cylinder at the front for the round part that drives the blower belt. I'm adding a few extra parts here just to get some detail in there. I mean, the engine's a really detailed thing. I want it to look at least semi-interesting when building the blockout. So I have these parts, link them to the body. Because the body's all linked, I can just double click it and I have selected all attached parts, which makes it really easy to copy it to the other side. There we go, that's looking good already. I'm leaving an open gap between the superchargers and the engine because, as I said before, I don't really have an idea how exactly they'll be attached. For this sort of problems, I need more reference, and I decided the engine should be a little bit bigger even, just to get it to look better. It even needs to be a little longer, and I think we're almost getting there with my engine blockout. What I'm going to do now is create a box to create the front grille from. It's the part from the car where the radiator hides inside. It's a very typical part for a hot rod, so I definitely have to make it in my blockout. Just looking at a few references, deciding what sort of shape I'm going for. I really haven't figured that out yet. At the moment here, I'm just quickly creating a shape and well, just making something that should work for what I'm doing here. This one's really squarish because it's a temporary shape and it's a difficult shape to actually model. I'm going to leave it at that. Extrude this a little bit to the inside, and same here. The radiator will sit inside there, so it has to be extruded more. And there we go. That should do for my blockout. You'll frequently see me just rotate and look around my model. This is just really important to see where your model is heading, what the proportions are like, and to spot problems. Headlights, just starting with a sphere, reducing the number of segments, and delete half of it. Well, not deleting it, I'm scaling it flat, but I would delete it if I was making this a final model. If I scale it flat, I can create the headlight lenses from that. So there we go, headlight lenses created. Turn those to gray also. The headlights are like the eyes of a car, so you definitely have to create them in a blockout. Getting a feel for the positioning. And now I want my headlights to be attached to the frame. Don't want them to float out there because that's going to look a little bit weird. So I just created a spline because I noticed on my reference that they're also connected in this way. So now I'm going to mirror them to the other side. So I have a set of two. And right now I'm going to save my file. Very important to do this. Sometimes you can get really carried away creating stuff, but it's important that you save in case your computer completely freezes on you. I've had it happen a number of times during this project. You'll hear about that later. But you really don't want to lose any work because you forgot to save. So remember to do that, guys. Okay, so here's my windshield. Very simple. It's just a flat glass plane. with two frame parts on the outside. For now, a box will do. Looking at some reference, this is some crazy construction with a few parts on top of each other. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to keep it simple. And that's something I found really cool on the hot rods. I definitely wanted in mind is there's this connecting part between the outer ends of the windshield and the front lights. I definitely want that in my car as well, because it's interesting. It's an interesting shape. It breaks with the shapes of the rest of the car, and just makes it cool to look at. So it's important that when creating something that you look for these typical elements, these typical shapes that can really make your object, your vehicle, whatever it's in any case, that can make things stand out more. So looking at the rear wheels now, I find they have to be a little bit less wide. Don't want them to go over the top. Back to my reference, and what I want to do now is create the exhaust. Very important parts of a hot rod. Hot rods are loud, noisy, and fast, so they definitely need big typical exhausts. So of course an exhaust like this you create with a spline. There's no other way I'd even attempt to do this. They're easy to tweak, they're a good starting point, and best of all, they have automatically generated UV coordinates. So just aligning these points with the car, and I'm not sure what sort of exhaust system I want to go for. I think I'm going to go for a 4-in-2 exhaust. So you have 4 pipes coming out of the engine, and they end up in 2 separate pipes. I want the shape to be interesting, so making the rear one a little bit shorter than the front one. And I'm tweaking these splines to make sure I don't have any unnecessary segments in there. Alright, so now I have these 2 shapes. Duplicate this one over here. Make sure it's not an instance, so I can delete it and make it flow into the main exhaust pipe. Just trying to align it and get it to look like it fits smoothly. These models will all be cleaned up later. The important thing is here that we get a feel for our design, that we get an idea of how things are going to be aligned towards each other, what the proportions will be. Just moving them around a bit. Make sure they're spread equally, because the distance between cylinders in a car engine is always the same. Not one cylinder that's spread apart further from the others. The spread is always equal. So now I have my parts here. Going to mirror them to the other side. There we go. And I'm going to attach all of them to the engine. Why? Well, I'm doing all my attachments here because I have my frame, and I want to rotate the frame, and everything that's attached to the frame, I'm testing it here right now, I want it to move along. So now I'm actually going to look for my stance and my rotation in my car. So I'm moving this up and rotating it so it looks correctly. Yeah, there we go. This is pretty much the stance I want in my car. Yeah, just rotating it a bit around to get a better idea of what I've just changed. Yeah, duplicate the front windshield there, because I was thinking I might be able to create a second flap down part there. It doesn't hurt to try in a blockout. A blockout's there for you to try ideas, to look for things that work, that don't work. So don't be afraid to try some different shape and see if it's going to work. A lot of details are lacking in this blockout, but that doesn't really matter, because it's all about general shapes. So there's a few things we still have to do here. One of those is in my design. On my front axle I had spikes attached, so you can see them here. I want to create those too. So I'm just going to start from a box to create those spike shapes from. Scale those down so it actually becomes a spike. And there we go. The idea is just that this is a car for a game like Brutal Legend. You'll drive around hitting a lot of whatever, animals, people, roadkill, and you want your car dealing a lot of damage. Plus these shapes just look interesting, so I'm adding them as well to the front of my car. Also, one of the things, and you'll notice afterwards, it really helps make the car more unique if I add those. This is a bit more modeling than the other parts, not just primitives, because it's such a specific shape. I can't really get away with primitives for that. And now I want to move these around a bit so I can get them on the correct position on the front axle, duplicating them around on my car. And I want 3 on there because 3 is a nice looking number. 2 is not enough, 4 would be too much. So now we have our blockout done, and this is pretty much the first part I would start with when you're doing a fictional model. It's very important to see here that I'm not making something exactly from reference, and I really had to look for the proportions and how I was going to space and form everything. This is a good way to start things. From here on out, we're going to model in extra details and start reshaping this blockout into both a high poly and a low poly model. This blockout can serve as a base for both. So hope you guys got some more insight in the process of creating a car like this, and I'll see you for the next tutorial.